Good afternoon, DK here with Mr. V Amps. We're going to be looking today, just briefly, we have this Epiphone Valve Jr set, and if you do any research and reading on the Valve Jr, you'll find out it's one of the most highly modified, tinkered with, played around with amps on the internet. And at one point, you could, they were inexpensive and people were buying them and trying to hot rod them. And there apparently are 4 different revisions of this, and they talked about all the inherent problems in the design. And this was, if I'm not mistaken, this is a Piotr Beloff creation. Piotr Beloff, I think he's been working for Ampeg now, but when Epiphone brought out their Valve series, the Blues Custom down there, that big boy over here, that's the one that Peter Beloff, it's actually pronounced Piotr. It's a Eastern European. I want to say it's a Russian sounding name, but I don't want to pinpoint him as being from there. But that was the amp that he kind of hung his hat on. And there's also the Epiphone Valve Sr that came out around the same time. And so all really nice, good amps. But the complaints that people had about the Valve Jr were things related to noise. It hummed. It had 120 hertz hum, I guess. And I've seen different schematics, some that had a DC filament structure and some that didn't. But I cannot reproduce any of the problems that were discussed. There's a lot of tone mods and gain mods and things like that for them, but as far as having an inherent problem of noise, I just don't get it from this one. Just for fun, we will try and listen to this thing. I'll put the camera right up next to it, and we'll see if we can hear this mysterious 120 hertz hum. I hear more hum from my fluorescent light than I do from this amplifier. And I had this thing dimed. Okay, so it's had a minute to warm up, and the volume is on 0. And it is making 0 sound. And not until you get to 3/4 do you get, or about 2/3, I guess, right there. Now you hear just the normal, little bit of shushy sound. Even when you get it to full volume, the hiss is not that bad. And quite frankly, this will blow your face off if I were to so much as play a note. Allegedly, the humming problem had something to do with the input jack, so we'll plug a guitar into it. And even at this point, the amp is virtually silent, and we're at, what, 1/3 the volume? Now I'm just going to hit the strings, and this camera is going to have a hissy fit. Right, so I don't see that this has an inherent noise problem, and quite frankly, it sounds really awesome when you put the volume at 1/2 or 2/3. It makes a great rock sound. This head is supposed to be 5 watts, but according to the amp geniuses on the internet, which all of them are geniuses, there's no wrong information on the internet. The output transformer to this is only capable of putting out about 3.5 watts on a good day, so you get this compressed, distorted output transformer sound. That's the Marshall sound. The old Plexi Marshalls were... transformer distortion was part of their sound, like the old 50 watters. But even when we get, up super hot, I can hear the guitar trying to feed back at this point. I mean, the gain on this is just through the roof. There, you can hear it. It's starting to feed back. It's still feeding back. There's a ton of gain, and it's feeding back. And the guitar is over there. So, what's wrong with this thing? I don't know. I will tell you what I find wrong with it, and it's not actually the amp itself. I don't intend to do anything major to this amp. I was contemplating changing tubes for fun because I have some extra tubes. But here is the kicker. If I want to get a cool distortion tone, I got to turn it up to, you know, half. And then it rocks. But it's going to be too loud for the camera. And it's going to be too loud for a venue that holds 200 people, 100, 200 people. So that can be a problem right there. So what do? Well, I'll put a stomp box in front of it. Okay, so I get my stomp box, I put my stomp box in front of it, I crank the stomp box so it crunches really good, and I got a great sound, and then I'm just going to back my volume down until, and then you get your volume down to about there, and your volume is like either like off or too loud, or off or too loud, or off or too loud. So that's the only inherent problem I'm seeing with this at this time. So I have my potential solution to that, and that'll be in our next project video probably later this week. But for today, let's actually just take this head apart and see what revision we have and how it's made, just for my own curiosity's sake. Okay, so let's just take a look at the label here and see if we have any clue. What do we have? Okay, so this is a 110 to 120 volt model. What a surprise. Power consumption is 35 watts. Model is Valve Jr head. Serial numbers there. And the fuse is a 2 amp 250 volt. A 2 amp fuse seems a little excessive for an amp this small. Most of these I think would get by with a 1 amp fuse just fine. If it's drawing 35 watts, yeah, I don't see that this would need a 2 amp fuse. I think a 1 amp fuse would work fine. But anyway, and then we have our output jacks over here for 4, 8, and 16 ohm. The speaker that chips in the cabinet is a 16 ohm Lady Luck speaker. It's an Eminence labeled OEM speaker, so it is produced internationally, unlike most of the Eminence speakers which are made stateside. So I might as well just pull the back off, take it apart, let me just take it apart and pull the chassis out. Take the back off, 4 bolts onto the caps, onto these plastic caps, and then it should come out, and we'll just take a look at the chassis and see what we can find. Okay, so let's see what we can deduct just from coming in here. I've already had a few surprises, not detrimental, crazy surprises. I've had, obviously I own also the Blues Jr., or not the Blues, I own the Blues Custom, excuse me. I think Blues Jr. Blues Jr. is a Fender amp. What am I thinking about? I own the Blues Custom and the Valve Senior, and I've been inside of both of those. The Valve Senior, it's a cool amp. I like that. But anyway, our power transformer here does also have the taps here. The black and white wire, which are these two, those are for, the black is the earth or the negative, and then you can either have 100 volt, 115 volt, 230, or 240. So this power transformer is already ready for international usage. When we flip it over, we'll take a look, but to switch this, if I were to, I could probably make a switching mechanism. If you go to Japan, I guess it's 100 volts. US or Canada would be 115, 120. 230 or 240 would be like Europe. I think that's right. And then our output side, we have 6.3, which is our filament voltage, and 260 volts. So, okay. The other thing that interests me is this has a standard issue fuse on the IEC plug. You can pop this out with a screwdriver to change the fuse, but the high voltage here also has a fuse. This is also fused, and I don't think it does it say anything other than fuse is 250 volt and T4AL, whatever that means. And this is on the orange wires. So the orange wires would be the filaments, because the orange wires are the filaments. Okay, so that's cool. Interesting. The tubes actually surprised me. Having owned the Blues Custom, the power tubes in there were Sovtex, but all of the preamp tubes were those Shiguang Chinese tubes. And they tend to be pretty gainy when you put a lot of voltage on them, and they really don't lead to a nice gentle tone. I actually really did like the sound of this amp right out of the gate, and I figured this had Chinesium tubes in it like the Voxes do. And I was like, okay, this will be fine. But no, this has a Sovtech EL84 aka 6BQ5, and the preamp tube, I figured up there's our Shiguang Chinese, but I was surprised to find not a Shiguang, but a Electro Harmonix 12AX7EH. So the tubes in here, although they might not have necessarily been my first choice for vacuum tubes, I do like the tongue saws in current production. These tubes are not garbage, so I don't feel the need to replace them. The other thing that apparently when they were assembling it, somebody didn't get that spring centered, and this shield was kind of tipped funny. So that's just me being retentive about it. And our output transformer, which is little and cute, this looks very similar to the one on the RTL1 model that I've made before. 16, 8 ohm, and 4 ohm taps, and a 5.2 k ohm primary. So that could probably be made to work with a 6V6 too. 6V6 and 6BQ5 are pretty similar. And then I get under here and look underside, and the first thing I notice is it's Valve Jr. and then version number VER 0, I'm reading it upside down, 051122. This board looks significantly different than some of the other pictures I've seen on the internet. So I'm seeing, when I see VER 05, I'm thinking this might be revision 5, which I haven't seen anybody write about, but on all the schematics that I had looked at, most everybody was only showing 3 filter caps, and on this one there are 4, which was one of the mods that everybody wanted to do, add a 4th filter cap. This 5th filter cap, this is probably the filter cap for the filaments. It looks like the high-powered rectification would be on the red wires, and let's see, the red goes here and there, so this would be your full bridge rectifier. The 4 diodes would be for your high. We have these, what do they call them? They're not metal film, they're metal something, but they're the concrete looking resistors, you know, the ones with the rough ceramic surface on them. Those are usually tough as nails. So we've got those in there, and then we've got another full bridge rectifier here, and that is probably for the filament structure. And so, because those are coming off the orange wire, so I'm assuming this is the full bridge rectifier for the filaments. And the capacitor for the filaments should be a much higher value, lower voltage, because they're only running at like 6-ish volts. Because I did see another schematic that was a later version. Yeah, this is a 16 volt cap back here. This big boy back here is a 16 volt cap, and I think it's like 4200 mic or something very high, where these are a typical 20 mic 450, probably 450 volt, 450, 400, 300, something like that. I'm just looking in here more for curiosity's sake, because being a later revision, I don't see this amp needing a lot of surgery, and I suppose the crew at Gibson actually cared and continued to revise and improve this amp over time. I'm guessing this was probably the last of the production runs, and I was able to purchase this as a new old stock. So what on here looks a little cheesy to me? The power switch is fine. I like it. It's cool. It's big. The input jack, I've heard a lot of complaints about that. It is mounted on a little mini board that probably has the grounding resistors. And then they run your input signal through these two small wires into the side of the board. That could be a source of noise, but again, we're way away from the power transformer. Power transformer is way over on this side. Power transformer's over here, like off camera. So that doesn't seem to be a problem. At this point, I really see nothing wrong with the amp that I would want to modify this. I actually, as is, I like the sound when it's turned up. But when it's turned up, it's too dang loud to be playing in the clubs that I like to play at with my rock band. So the plan for this, I think, is to build an attenuator. And the coolest rock tones I can think of always come from a cranked valve amplifier. And it almost is disheartening to me that so many valve amps have gone to this master volume, because the master volume knobs on these things that's where all the tone sucking occurs. They sound cool as heck, but you know, my Mr. Big amp with 85 watts in it, by the time you get that thing roaring, it's, you know, enough to knock the neighbors over. It's fun as heck. You stick some microphones in front of it and put your earplugs in and rock out. But with this amp, I think my plan of attack is going to be to make an attenuator. And the cool thing is we'll be able to use the attenuator with not only this amp, but also with our Vox night trains. We have two different Vox night trains, the version 1 and the version 2, which are significantly different. It's not just a revision of the same amp, it's actually a significantly different amp. Those do have master volumes, but again, when you roll that master volume back to back, they just sound wimpy. So if we can keep that sort of rock and roll tone and just knock the volume back a couple of pegs, that would be really cool. So anyway, I have nothing bad to say about this model amp other than getting the back off was a pain in the butt because it friction fits in there so dang tightly. But the case, this is made of plywood, so plywood rather than particle board. It's fairly lightweight. They actually bothered to put a shield in the top. Let's see if we can get that in there. You can see the aluminum foil, so it's shielded. The Tolex work is good. There is really nothing to fault this amp for. And this kit was new old stock. Both of them I bought as new old stock. You know, I guess the earlier revisions of these needed a lot of work, but I cannot see anything at this point that I need to do to this amp. I do have some older RCA tubes I could stick in there, but I mean, does it really need to happen? No. This thing sounds great, and it's a lot of fun, and it's light, and, you know, with the head not being too heavy and the speaker cabinet not too heavy, you can easily carry them to a gig. It's more than loud enough. It's too loud. So, what the heck? And just for fun, we'll close our video here with just a little bit. I actually have a sound studio down here and I record things, and we're going to listen to a fun little sound clip of some rock music. And I have amplifiers down here, guitar amps and bass amps that in the guitar amps we range anywhere from 3 watts up to 200 watts of power. And we have speakers as small as 8-inch all the way up to a set of 8 12-inch speakers, so driving 2 412 cabs. I'm just going to play you a clip of the record, and then for fun you can tell me which amps you think I actually used to record that. Because, again, I found the best sound is not to try and use a master volume and get to a nice, happy, recordable level. It's just to stick some earplugs in, crank that thing up, roll tape, and enjoy. So that was the methodology that was used. We'll play the clip, and then we'll take a look at the amps for a surprise. I'm going to put this back together, because if it ain't broke, I don't have to fix it.
1, 2, 3, 4. Bird kicks dead. 4 to its head. Bird kicks dead. 4 to its head. 14 bullets. 4 punk rockets. 14 bullets. 4 punk rockets. No more whoppers. No more whoppers. No more whoppers. No more whoppers. Bird kicks dead. 4 to its head.
Okay, just for reference, there were 2 guitar tracks on there. Both of them are recorded. Actually, one of them I think we used this Gibson Les Paul, and the other one I used the PVT-60, both humbucker equipped guitars. The one channel had the Braddock amp, which is a 12-watt single-ended with an 807 power tube. It's an amp I constructed here in the shop, and you can find that on another video. It's actually kind of a crappy video, but it is in there. It's a very simple amplifier. The control panel is basically input, tone, and volume, and on. That's it. It's got a single 10-inch speaker. It's a Weber Blue Pup. And the other one is the RTL Model 1. And this is completely constructed from 100% scratch right here in our shop. And this little amp is a whopping 3 watts into an 8-inch speaker. The speaker is a little Celestian, what do they call it, 815 I think? It's a little 15-watt Celestian speaker. Cheap little speaker. I think it's like a $20 speaker. And this little amp is dimed, and well, actually not quite dimed, about 3/4 volume, and the Braddock was about 3/4 volume. And stick microphones in front of them, turn it up, and record. So little amps can really rock out. Just for reference, so you have a size perspective, those are our 2 little amps we actually recorded with, and the Les Paul sits in front of 8 12-inch speakers powered by a 200-watt Randall. So, you know, we're talking amps that are smaller than a Vox Night Train 15, smaller than an Epiphone Valve Sr, which is about 18 watts, smaller than the PV Encore 65, which is a 65-watt single 12-inch, definitely smaller than our Blues Custom, any of our Voxes. These are among 2 of the smallest amps in our arsenal. The only other small one we have is a Gibson Les Paul Jr. Repro, which is also visible on the channel where we take that apart. So, as far as power goes, the lowest power amp and one of the third lowest power amps we had recorded that rock and roll song. So there you go. So that's our plan for the Epiphone Valve Jr. over there, hanging out next to our super cool Con Strobo tuner. Yeah, we're going to make an attenuator so we can crank it up and get a rock tone without blowing your face off. Cool, thanks for watching. I'm glad I don't know, I'm sort of happy and sad that I'm not going to be doing any modifications to that amp, but you don't need to modify something that doesn't suck out of the gate. And I guess the early ones did suck, but that one sure doesn't suck. It sounds great.